Job chapter 17. Job's finishing up his rebuttal of Eliphaz. This is round 2 for Eliphaz, second time he's talked to him. Last week we saw Job at this very low place. He seems to do this, high, low kind of a thing. And last week we saw him where he had entered into the sufferings of Christ. Some of the things he was saying there didn't really apply to him, applied to Jesus. He says in verse 19 of chapter 16, he says, "Surely even now my witness is in heaven, and my evidence is on high. My friends scorn me. My eyes pour out tears to God. Oh, that one might plead for a man with God as a man pleads for his neighbor. And when a few years are finished, I shall go the way of no return." He says, my advocate, the one who's watching over me, the one who's going to be a witness of me and for me, is that one in heaven, and he's watching over me. Again, he's been really low. This is one of those high places. It's interesting because in James chapter 5, he says, "My brethren, take the prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord as an example of suffering and patience. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure, and you have heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful." What's interesting about that thing is James classes Job as a prophet. He puts him in that same category with all the other prophets. And, so some of these words that Job speaks aren't just his words. They are prophetic words, But his life is also speaking and telling a story. And that leads us to Revelation 19:10. It says there, "For the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy." So we see even in the severe testing of Job that as he goes low, then he seems to catch a glimpse of something that's awesome about God, some aspect of God that he's never seen before, and it brings grace, and it brings hope, and it brings joy for even just a few minutes in his testing. It says in chapter 17, verse 1, "My spirit is broken. My days are extinguished. The grave is ready for me." My spirit is broken. My breath, it's the ruha in the Hebrew, My spirit, the deepest part of me, this connection I have between God and I, this thing is broken. And, my days are extinguished. I'm just a pile of rubble here. I'm running out of time. "Are not mockers with me, and does not my eye dwell on their provocation? Now put down a pledge for me with yourselves. Who is he who will shake hands with me?" In the old Arab markets, they have this transition, this thing about they barter for everything. They're constantly bartering, and when you finally make a deal, they slap hands. And when you slap hands, that's the deal. You've set the deal. We would do the high five. That's how we would do it. But Job says, who is there to do a high five with me? Who is there to mark the end of this deal with me? "For you have hidden their heart from understanding. Therefore, you will not exalt them." No doubt he's speaking about his friends here, how they've talked back to him, how they're trying to convince him that he's evil, that he's wicked, that he's got some underlying sin, "He who speaks flattery to his friends, even the eyes of his children will fail. But he has made me a byword of the people, and I have become one in whose face men spit." Speaking flattery is simply speaking for the approval of men and not God. People that just speak flattery are just looking to impress other people. And I think it's interesting in verse 6, "But he has made me a byword." A byword, People still allude to Job when they think about suffering, when they think about going through a trial. Isn't it funny? Here we are 3,500 years later. I don't know how you place this, but thousands of years later, we still know suffering and patience and endurance because of this guy. And he says, he has made me, God has made me a byword of the people, and I have become one in whose face men spit. My eye has also grown dim because of sorrow, and all my members are like shadows. Upright men are astonished at this, and the innocent stirs himself up against the hypocrite. The upright man will be astonished, because when the upright read his story, tell about his story, listen to his story, study his story like we are, they're going to understand that he's not guilty of sin. He's not going through this trial and this pain and this suffering because he's a sinner, because he's worse than anybody else. They're going to, all of this has befallen me without sin. Not that he's sinless. Throughout the ages, people struggle with always the same question, right? Why do the righteous suffer, and why do the wicked prosper? They're always struggling with that, and it's the same in Job's day. Yet the righteous will hold to his way, and he who has clean hands will be stronger and stronger. But please come back again, all of you, for I shall not find one wise man among you all. Job is suffering, and he gets a little short. You ever done that? You're in pain, you got a migraine, something's going on, and somebody's kind of pestering you, and you kind of get a little short with them. That's what's going on in Job, Oh, please come back again. Please bring it back again, because I will not find one wise man among you. My days are past, my purposes are broken off, even the thoughts of my heart. This is a pretty deep and lonely place. My days are past. I've seen every good day I'm going to see. I'm just waiting for the end of life, Even the thoughts of my heart and the purposes I have are broken off. Everything I've worked for, everything I've tried to accomplish, everything I've done has just been, it was going along great, and then just snap. And it's over. It's done. I can't even find any hope buried deep in my heart. For you and me, that can never be true. Oh, it may be the way you feel, but it can never be true. Our purposes can't be broken off. When we breathe our last breath, when we, take that last breath on planet Earth, we take our first breath in the next world. There was no breaking off, There was no end. I'm still going to know you. You're still going to know me, unfortunately. Sorry, Our relationship is not done. It's not over. There's no end to it. And it won't be the end of our purposes. Paul said we're supposed to walk worthy of the calling with which we've been called. And part of our vocation, part of that calling is passing from this life into that life. It's like a graduation ceremony, Chuck Smith said it was like that, one day he's just not going to be here and he's going to be there. He's going to be graduated, And so are you laying up treasure in heaven? Are you building on the rock, that solid rock? Or are you just living down here? Because if your hope and all your dreams and all your goals are just what's down here, oh, that's a miserable way to live, because you're not in control of any of that. But if you're aiming ahead, pointing ahead, hoping ahead, that's a great place to be. Verse 12, They change the night into day. His sufferings do this. They change the night into day. The light is near, they say, in the face of darkness. All this suffering and all his struggles cause morning to come too soon. You ever had a night like that? Brenda just had a night like that, where it's like you're going through something and suddenly the sun's up and you're like, I didn't get any sleep at all. I'm not ready for the sun to be up. And the light, it goes by without even shining on me. It's like it's darkness during the daytime. Verse 13, if I wait for the grave as my house, and if I make my bed in the darkness, if I say to corruption, you are my father, and to the worm, you are my mother, where then is my hope? Again, pretty low, right? When you're trying to make friends of your suffering and friends of the worms that are crawling in and crawling out of your sores and, all of that stuff, oh man. His body is rotting. I just can't picture that. I've had little oozy sores, just little ones, but I never had any worms crawling in and out of them. That would drive me. I never had to scrape them with a piece of broken pottery, to find some kind of relief and get the gook out of them. And, and he's saying to those worms, oh, you're my family now. This is where I'm at home, right here. I don't want to be at home there, I just as well live here. I just as well accept it. This is the rest of my life. I've got to get used to it. I got to move into the new digs. This is it. Where is my hope? As for my hope, who can see it? Will they go down to the gates of Sheol? Shall we have rest together in the dust? If there's any hope out there, I certainly can't see it. That's what he's saying. He says, I'm looking all over the place. You guys aren't helping me, I'm looking everywhere else, and I see nothing. I don't see. The only hope I see is the grave. What a sad place, right? And then Bildad, his other friend, he can't take it any longer, And Bildad chimes in here for his round too. It says, then Bildad the Shuhite answered and said, how long till you put an end to words? Gain understanding, and afterwards we will speak. Oh, Job, you are so long-winded. All you do is talk, 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 All you do is whine, and I can't stand to listen to it any longer. I don't know where this guy calls himself a friend of Job. Because you don't talk to friends that way. When you have a suffering friend, when you have a friend that's going through it, the last thing you do is you walk over and go, oh, shut up, and walk on, Grow up. Get over it, He's just lost his 10 kids. I can't imagine that, period. He's lost everything. They've apparently kicked him out of his house and he has to live in the garbage dump because, well, he's unclean now and nobody knows what he's got, so he's an outcast. And he's living in the garbage dump on an ash heap. This is home now. This guy used to sit in the gate of the city. He was a judge. He was a somebody, All the aged people would rise when he came, and, all the young people would hush up and, hug a wall or whatever as he walked by, and there was this great respect. Now that same guy, you think about it, did he have satin sheets? Did he have, 300 thread count Egyptian cotton? What in the world did he have? And now he calls home the garbage dump on the ash heap, just, this is it. His flesh is on fire. There's these painful boils, and he's being eaten by maggots. You don't say, would you just shut up, Job? I'm tired of listening to you, to a guy like that. It says in verse 3, Why are we counted as beasts and regarded as stupid in your sight? Do I really have to explain that to you, Bildad? I think it's funny he had to ask that question. Perhaps it's because the beasts of the field could teach you a lesson, Job had said in a previous chapter. Why are we counted as stupid? Well, to quote Forrest Gump, stupid is as stupid does, and you're stupid, That's how you're acting. You're unloving, you're uncaring, you're without grace, you're without, care or compassion. You're speaking without a filter. You're supposed to be salt and light, and you're none of those things. You who tear yourself in anger, shall the earth be forsaken for you, or shall the rock be removed from its place? The light of the wicked indeed goes out, and the flame of his fire does not shine. Again, he is treating Job like a sinner, like an evil person. The light of the wicked, that's you, Job. Your light's surely going out, The lamp in the Old Testament was that oil lamp, with the little cloth thing up there that would soak in oil, and then you'd light that, and as long as there was cloth and it was outside, the little wick would burn. And he says, man, when that flame died, there was no light. The lamp in your tent, that's interesting, the lamp in your tabernacle, the lamp in you, it's going out, Job. And there's just darkness left. Great way to talk to your friend. The light is dark in his tent, and his lamp beside him is put out. The steps of his strength are shortened, and his own counsel casts him down. Your own words, Job, that's the cause of you being cast down. That's what you're doing wrong. You're arrogant. You're speaking wrongly about God. You're doing all of this stuff. It's your smarty pants attitude, Job. That's what's doing it. That's why your strength is withering away. For he is cast into a net by his own feet, and he walks into a snare. Job, you're walking around and you're not seeing the traps that are set for you. The net takes him by the heel. The snare lays hold of him. The noose is hidden for him on the ground, and a trap for him in the road. These are very dangerous places. Traps and snares, they're everywhere, they're saying. And if you read verse 11, it says, terrors frighten him on every side and drive him to his feet. Then it turns into paranoia, and suddenly every imagination and around every bush there's evil. And that's the way you're talking, Job. You just think there's evil around every corner. You're like one of those guys afraid of everything, any noise, any movement, and they're going to drive you to your feet and you're going to run. Verse 12, his strength is starved and destruction is ready at his side. You have no real strength because you haven't eaten. You've been kind of starving yourself. It hurts you to eat, so you're not eating, and destruction is looming all around you. I think about this place where there's snares and they're hidden. And I was watching this show on Netflix. I do that sometimes. And it was a series about these rescue people that work near the Matterhorn. And because the Matterhorn is there, they get all these thrill seekers, and they all go to this little place. And there's tons of people who go skiing on these glaciers. Well, on these glaciers, there's fissures under the snow. And if you go down the wrong place, you go into one of them fissures, and good luck. Maybe they'll find you, maybe they won't, And that's what he says Job is like. You're just out there skating around, not understanding that evil will just trap you and catch you, when Job isn't evil. He's not just skating around like that, It devours patches of his skin, and the firstborn of death devours his limbs. It devours is death. Death devours patches of his skin. Your body will continue to rot, Job. It's going to rot you right into death itself. It's going to take you limb by limb. He is uprooted from the shelter of his tent, and they parade him before the king of terrors. You're going to be uprooted from your tent, from your body, from your tabernacle, right? Your physical body. This confidence you have now that God's watching over you, that you're really okay with him, that's going to be rooted out. And you will be paraded before, this is an interesting thing, before the king of terrors. Interesting way to think about that. That's what's going to happen to you, Job. They dwell in his tent who are none of his. Brimstone is scattered on his dwelling. This seems to be saying you won't have a permanent place anymore, Job. And the dwelling that you will share will be on fire. What you got to understand is he says his dwelling, his tent, his physical body is on fire right now. His roots are dried out below and his branches wither above. He says, in a couple of chapters earlier, he says it would be better to be like a tree, because at least if you cut a tree down and the roots stay in the ground, there's hope that that thing will spring back up. There'll be a green shoot coming out of that thing. His roots are dried out below and his branch withers above. The memory of him perishes from the earth, and he has no name among the renowned. Nobody's ever going to remember you. But let me ask you a question. Do you remember a guy named Bildad, or do you remember a guy named Job? Yeah, it's funny. Thousands of years later, you can ask somebody, hey, you ever heard about Job? The guy in the Bible? Guess what? Most people have heard about Job. Oh, you're going to have no name among the renowned. Can I just, in Ezekiel chapter 14, Ezekiel's talking about a destruction that's going to come upon Jerusalem. And he says this, he says, even if these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Job were in it, they would only deliver themselves. That's a name of renown. God couldn't find any three more righteous people than Noah, Daniel, and Job. I would like to be in that group, Verse 18, he is driven from light into darkness and chased out of the world. Imagine you're Job and your buddy is telling you this. This is the process, Job, of what's going on in your evil heart because you're wicked, is you're being driven from light into darkness. Isn't that just exactly the opposite of what happened to us when we got saved? We came from darkness into light, And chased out of the world. Oh, you're on your way out. You're about to die. He has neither son nor posterity among the people, nor any remaining in his dwelling. Oh, thanks for that. That's really cruel, isn't it? 10 kids just passed away. You're still mourning them. And this guy says, oh, you got no posterity. That's one of the calling signs. God's after you. Those in the west are astonished at his day, and those in the east are frightened. It's an interesting thing. Those in the west, perhaps it's those who have come before him. Nope, those who have come after him. They're going to be astonished. Those who come after you, Job, they're going to be astonished. But those of the east, and perhaps that means those who went before you, those who are now with you, they're terrified by looking at your life. Surely such are the dwellings of the wicked, and this is the place of him who does not know God. Catch the insinuation? Your condition proves that you're a wicked sinner. Your condition proves that you don't know who God is. But it turns out that Job knows the Lord much better than his three buddies do. But you'd never guess that at this point in the story. Chapter 19, then Job answered and said, how long will you torment my soul and break me in pieces with words? Job breaks in. Job interrupts Bildad, and he says, how long? Now that is the same phrase Bildad used in 18, verse 2. He says, how long till you do whatever? And Job breaks back in and says, how long will you torment my soul and break me into pieces, Your words literally are crushing me, Bildad. That's what he's saying. We all grew up singing that song, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words will never hurt me. What a stupid song. Because it's absolutely wrong, right? Because somebody can come up with a baseball bat and smack you and break your arm or break your femur, and your femur will heal. But you have a dad come up and call you an idiot, or you have some other person come up and they can call you names. They can use words against you, and sometimes 40, 50, 60 years later, those words are still on you, still haunt you. Job is saying, guys, I'm just a human being here. I don't know what you think I am, but I'm your friend, and I'm just human, and I have a heart, and I have feelings, and I have emotion. It may look like I'm dead to you already, but I am not dead. I have a beating heart, I still feel what you guys are saying to me. We need to be very careful with these things God gave us. This tongue, James says that baby is tied to the pit of hell. And I've run across some people that, the tongue was pretty short apparently because it wasn't very far from hell. You know what was coming out of their mouth? God put that thing in a cage for a reason. It's in a cage. Choose to close the cage once in a while. There are times that we are called on to speak the truth in love, right? Your job is to make sure it's truth and to make sure it's in love. Because it's so easy not to do either or both of those things. We're to speak the truth in love with a spirit of meekness, considering ourselves, lest we also be overtaken in the same thing that they're overtaken in. But what's interesting about Job is none of this stuff that they're telling him applies to him because he is not there because of sin. God says, hey, look at this guy. He's the most righteous guy in all of the East. And they're saying, oh, man, you're so wicked. Who are you going to believe? Job's not in sin. He's simply going through hardship. He's suffering. That's why everything these three say to him is wrong. Oh, there is truth mingled in there, just not for Job. None of it applies to his situation. So verse 3, these 10 times you have reproached me, and you are not ashamed that you have wronged me. These 10 times. He's not literally saying 10 times. It's that Hebrew thing of multiplying. He's saying time after time after time after time. You guys keep coming back and you bring reproach. You're calling me evil. You're calling me wicked. And through it all, you're not ashamed that you're pointing your finger at me, that you're calling me wicked, you're calling me a sinner, that you're wronging me. You're my friend, or you're my friends. You're not even embarrassed to talk to me like you're talking to me, or to treat me like dirt. Verse 4, and if indeed I have erred, My error remains with me. Now, this is really fun in the Hebrew. The Hebrew in Job is probably the toughest Hebrew in the whole Bible because it's the earliest Hebrew in the whole Bible. But he says, if indeed I have erred, and it's a very specific word that means if I have sinned unintentionally towards God. What it doesn't say is it doesn't say I have been in open rebellion or outright, sin against him. If perhaps I have sinned, it's been unintentionally, and my sin remains with me. What he's saying is, if I have erred like that, then my sin is in me alone. I'm not leading others into that sin. I'm not drawing others with me. I'm not leading anyone else astray. It's just me. But one of the things you need to remember about this is, you remember Satan. He showed up with God, and they had this little discussion. Hey, take this. Hey, do this. Job will curse you to your face. Don't you understand? Satan is the accuser of the brethren. Who are these three speaking for when they're speaking? Are they accusing Job? Oh, so these guys are just Satan's mouthpiece. It says in verse 5, if indeed you exalt yourselves against me and plead my disgrace against me, know then that God has wronged me and has surrounded me with his net. If you're going to plead against me and accuse me and stand against me, then know this, guys, that God has me, that God's in control of all of this. It isn't death that has me in its net. It's not my sin that's doing this to me. It isn't the king of terrors, taking control of me. God is in control here. I love that fact, that he can look around, and at times he blames God, and that's wrong, but he at least knows God's in control of all this. None of this could happen if he didn't allow it. That's something we should know, It says in verse 7, if I cry out concerning wrong, I am not heard, and if I cry aloud, there is no justice. He has fenced up my ways so that I cannot pass. And he has set darkness in my paths. When I cry out, Job says, not getting any feedback, not getting any answers from God. There's silence there. It seems to me like there's no justice, because I don't know of a single wrong I've done that would upset God like this. Have you ever been in a place where God's been silent? You're going through something, and God's just silent. And you're like, God, I'm seeking you. I need to hear from you. Don't know what you're doing. Don't know why you're doing it. I would like to hear from you. And he leaves you alone, seemingly. When he does that, he's right there with you. He's just not speaking. He's right there with you, wanting you to walk by faith, not by sight. So he says, he has fenced up my ways so that I cannot pass. He's put me in a corral. I'm in a box canyon. There's no way out, There's walls all around me. I feel like I've been driven into this corner, and there is no way out. I can't see it. He has stripped me of my glory and taken the crown from my head. And remember, he was a judge. He was a wealthy guy. He had all the position and power and all of the stuff. And now he's living in a garbage dump. God has removed all of that from me. The head that once wore a crown, as it were, now lays down in the dust. He breaks me down on every side, and I am gone. My hope he has uprooted like a tree. I can't turn anywhere to find a footing, to find a place to get a stance, to take a stand, some place to rest, some place to have hope. And my hope, it's not just cut off like a tree, like I told you a couple of chapters back when he says a tree at least has hope when you cut it. No, they've pulled the roots out of the ground. My roots aren't even in the ground anymore. I've been uprooted. He has also kindled his wrath against me, and he counts me as one of his enemies. Oh, Job, you've gone too far. Now, this is exactly how Job feels, but this is not true. We know that. It's true from Job's perspective. I don't see any hope. I don't feel him. I don't hear him. I don't know what's going on. But we know God loves Job. But God also remembers that Job is just dirt man. He's just dust. And he remains pitiful towards him, full of pity, full of mercy, full of grace. That's the God who is watching him go through this. His troops come together and they build up their road against me. They encamp all around my tent. He says, Lord, I'm just a tent. I'm not like a big city. I'm just a tent. And it's like you've built this siege mound against me. You know, the enemy is right here and he's attacking me from all sides. And I'm just a tent. Why would you do that, Lord? And now here in 13, he begins to get to his lowest part in the book so far. He says in verse 13, he has removed my brothers far from me, and my acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My family, he starts to speak about loneliness and isolation. Here's a guy that was a somebody in the city. Hundreds, thousands of friends. Everybody knew him. Everybody talked to him. They were glad to meet Job and glad to be around him. And he says, my brothers, my family, my acquaintances, completely estranged from me. My relatives have failed, and my close friends have forgotten me. Those who dwell in my house and my maidservants count me as a stranger. My family, my kinfolk, they've all failed me. And that is a tough road. I know some of this. I was the only Christian I knew of in my entire family when I got saved. And I know what it's like to go over to mom and dad's house and it's not mom and dad's house anymore. There's this wall. You talk to your brothers and sisters and there's this wall. There's always this wall, I know what that's like, He says, my closest friends. Is there anybody here that your closest friends are not your closest friends anymore? It's funny, 2 years ago I decided I'm going to go rekindle some relationships with some old buddies I had. And as long as I drove to their house and I took them to lunch and I did whatever, hey, they were happy to talk to me. Nobody ever called me. Nobody ever went my way, And I'm like, well, that's a waste, I just find it interesting, He says, those who dwell in my house and my maidservants, those employees of mine, those people I were around all the time, they count me as a stranger. I am an alien in their sight. Those who I treated the best, those who I employed and made sure they had room and board and care, lodging, all of that stuff. He says in verse 16, I call my servant, but he gives no answer, right? I beg him with my mouth. He's your servant. And he treats you like you're nobody now. I don't need to pay attention to him. I beg him, but there's no response. My breath is offensive to my wife, and I am repulsive to the children of my own body. Now, I don't think this is just bad breath, although he may have had that because of this condition. I'm not saying he didn't. But I think it's his words, it's his spirit, it's his ruha again. In the King James Version, Job 19:17 reads like this: "My breath is strange to my wife, though I entreated for the children's sake of my own body." My spirit met kind of an unwilling spirit. I was trying to comfort my wife about our kids being gone. I was trying to console her, and that was strange breath to her. That was kind of offensive to her. And who can blame her? She lost 10 kids too, you know. I mean, I don't know what's going on there, but, you know, he's literally saying she's broken beyond my ability to help her. Even young children despise me. I arise and they speak against me. You know, can you imagine the young kids? The old and the wise, they used to raise up in Job's presence because he was such this amazing man of God. Everyone was willing to hear, but now even the little kids disrespect him. Oh, there goes old Wormy. Here's old Wormy. Yeah, don't get close to him. You get those worms. You know, can you imagine him teasing him, calling him names, you know, laughing at him now? Verse 19, all my close friends abhor me, and those whom I love have turned against me. All my most intimate friends, they abhor me. Those I love, you know, this is tough ground. He's talking about extreme isolation and loneliness. Nobody's coming out here to talk to him. You know, he keeps these 3 friends around. Maybe they're the only 3 friends that have ever come around. Everybody else won't even go see him. Again, we see him in this depth, in this deep place, entering into the sufferings of Christ. My bones cling to my skin and to my flesh. I have escaped by the skin of my teeth. Now, we have no idea what that saying actually means, because we've made it, you know, it's a close shave when you escape by the skin of your teeth. You know, you're just getting by. We have no idea what that saying meant, you know, 3,500 years ago. It may have meant the same thing. We don't know. But it seems he's saying my life hangs by a thread. You know, there's just this paper-thin thing that's keeping me alive. Have pity on me. Have pity on me, O you my friends, for the hand of God has struck me. This is the heartbreaking place, if you're reading this. He's looking at these 3 guys, and he is begging them, would you just have a heart towards me? Job is desperate for anyone to care, for any port in the storm, because they're not showing any pity. Every human relationship he has is fractured or gone. You know, it's failed. And he is very lonely and he is very depressed. I can relate again this much. You know, in 2000, we had a tough year. In 2000, early in 2000, the little church we were going to in Idaho Falls dried up and blew away. So the pastor moved. They moved to California. And then the 4 friends we used to hang out with all the time, one moved to Kentucky, one moved to Oklahoma City, one moved to wherever, you know. They didn't just move a few miles away, they moved thousands of miles away. And we went from having, you know, we would go over to these people's houses 2 or 3 times a week, and we would fellowship, and we'd have Bible studies, and we'd just hang with these people constantly, to having nobody, literally having almost no friends. And then, you know, late in that year, we got in a wreck. And I remember sitting there for days on end, wondering if anybody even cared, if anybody even knew us. And it was lonely because I was used to hanging out at work where I had, you know, 200 friends, and I knew them all by name, and I talked with everybody, and suddenly all of those guys are gone. I'd never work again. You know, never see most of them again. And you go from having all of this to having nothing, and you find this very lonely place where it is just you and God. And you better become friends with him, because that's the only friend you got right now, And I believe that God did that to bring me closer to him during that period of time, to help that relationship between me and him. But it doesn't mean it was good. Doesn't mean it was fun. I do believe it was prep work for becoming a minister, because a minister is a lonely, stupid place to be also. Because everybody, well, he's busy. Well, he's a man of God. Well, I don't want to call him because, and nobody, so it's one of those things. He says, but my friends, all they do is accuse me. All they do is throw me under the bus. All they do is say, Job, this is all your fault. Why do you persecute me as God does? And why are you not satisfied with my flesh? Boy, those are tough questions. You don't think what God's doing is enough in my life. You think you've got to add to it. You think you've got to rub it in, So now from the lowest point, again, to another high point. I'm just going to read this and we'll go back and look at it. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book, that they were engraved on a rock with an iron pen and lead forever. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and he shall stand at the last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not another. How my heart yearns within me. Isn't it interesting? Thousands of years later, we're reading these words that were written in a book. Almost like they're everlasting words, right? Eternal words. Printed in a book. The idea is that for generation after generation, people would be able to read and learn from Job's story. He says, man, if people could just learn this. Engraved with an iron pen and lead. They used to practice that sometimes. They would chisel out letters and then they would pour lead into the letters to help keep it from cracking or keep it from breaking. And he says, man, if they were just permanent, if they were just sealed so they couldn't erode or be destroyed, because people could learn from my story. He says, I wish every generation could see or could hear what's going on with me and why it's going on. And then something seems to take place with Job. He seems to get another glimpse into heaven, another glimpse into the future. He becomes a prophet again, as James will call him. And he says in verse 25, for I know, oh, that we would all know this, that my Redeemer lives. And it's emphatic in the way it's written. It says, and I, even I, know this. Yes, me. I'm the one that knows this. That my Redeemer lives, literally is living. And he shall stand on the earth at the last, and he shall stand at last on the earth. And the idea behind that is that he's going to be the last one standing, the last one with a voice, the last one to judge, the last one, he's the final authority. That kind of idea. I think it's interesting that Redeemer, I know that my Redeemer lives. It's used 44 times in the Old Testament. It's never used in the New Testament. Redemption is used in the New Testament, but not Redeemer. When you see these things begin to happen, look up, lift up your eyes, for your redemption draws nigh. That's in the New Testament, but not Redeemer. And you can't reference this to the Redeemer we get used to in the Old Testament. Because in the Old Testament, the Redeemer was the Goel, the kinsman Redeemer. If you had a murder happen in your household, the kinsman Redeemer would rise up and go settle that issue, go take care of that issue. Or if you became a slave, or if you lost your property, the Redeemer would come and buy your property back or buy you out of slavery. He would do all of these things. But that's all through the law. This is pre-law. This is before that. So he seems to be speaking of someone who is not human, alive, but not human, an ever-living one. And he shall stand at last on the earth. He shall be the last one standing. Final say, final authority. And that's my Redeemer, that guy. Job says, that's what I know. I like that. Now, in the Old Testament, it speaks of a general resurrection. There are, 10 passages that speak about resurrection, and they all speak about kind of a general resurrection where the wicked and the just are raised and then they're sorted out, But in the New Testament, Jesus begins to speak in the Gospels, the Mount of Transfiguration. They're coming down from the Mount of Transfiguration, and Jesus tells the guys, he says, don't tell anybody what you saw up there until I'm raised out from among the dead. And these guys start scratching their head, and they go, well, what do you mean raised out from among the dead? No, we thought the dead were all raised up, and then you sorted them all out. Now you're telling us, no, there's a raising out from among. Eknekron is the words in the Greek. And, just look up Matthew 9:10 and you'll find all of that stuff, or Mark 9:10. But the New Testament teaches that, yes, both the wicked and the just will be raised, but they're raised in what's called the first resurrection and the second resurrection. And those are not points in time, but those are categories of resurrection. Because the first resurrection starts with Christ coming out of the grave. First resurrection starts there. Then you could go to the rapture. Then you got the 2 witnesses outside Jerusalem that are raised up. Then the Old Testament saints are raised at the beginning of the millennium. That's the first resurrection, and it's a resurrection unto life everlasting. But then you've got the second resurrection, which is a resurrection unto damnation, and that seems to take place at the great white throne judgment. It takes place at Revelation chapter 20, So here Job sees and he sees his Redeemer standing, having this final say. He says in verse 26, and after my skin is destroyed, after this tent after these worms get done doing whatever they're doing with my body, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God. After this flesh is destroyed. Do you have that hope? After this thing lays down, after this thing takes its last breath, that in my flesh, interesting, it died. It's destroyed. It's been eaten up. It's been, taken care of. It's turned back into dust. One day I'm going to stand in this same body. Oh, it's going to be revitalized. It's going to be renewed. There's a great upgrade coming for it. But this I know, that I'm going to stand before him and see him, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold it. Notice how he's telling you it's in my flesh, it's in my flesh, it's in this body, because he goes from talking about the flesh to his eyes. Hey, where's he getting these eyes? Shall behold and not another, how my heart yearns within me. How my heart yearns, this deepest part of me. You ever go through something just totally tragic and your gut hurts? In the Old Testament, it's literally your kidneys is what they're describing here. It's the deepest part of you. I remember when Ryan died, or when he was in the process of dying. Your gut just hurt. It wasn't my heart. It was down here somewhere. Something really deep and he's saying that very deepness is now just yearning that would happen right now. That I would see him, that I would pass off this flesh and be in that flesh and be there, We should just embrace. There's a lot of scholarly talk about this passage. Oh, does it really say that? Oh, does it really mean that? I think you just take it at its simple and best meaning. It says exactly what it says here. Job knows. Job the prophet knows this. I know that my Redeemer is alive and well. And he's the final judge. And I know I'm going to stand before him one day. And that in that day I'm going to see him with my eyes. And I'm going to be in my flesh, even after this flesh is done and gone. He's in one of the lowest places you could ever get, and yet he sees this glorious picture of what's going to happen. Every relationship has failed, and yet Job's heart is yearning. One day I'm going to be there. It's going to be his testimony of me that gets me there. It's going to be his testimony of me that matters, and not what my friends say about me. It's not what my wife says about me. It's not what anybody else says. And all of that is true for us also. Our Redeemer is alive. Oh yeah, he came down here. He took on flesh. He died in our place, but he got back up. Right? Now he's seated at the right hand of the throne of the Majesty on high, and he ever lives to make intercession for us there. And his judgment is the only judgment that matters. It is the final authority, And if he's looked at you, and if he's said, justified, then you're saved. That voice that says now you're justified is the same voice that said you're a sinner. He set this level, and he can overrule that with this level at any time he wants to. I don't care what the world says about you. I don't care what your conscience tells you about you. I don't care what little demon is haunting you, saying, oh, but what about this? And oh, but what about that? If you've given your life to Christ, if you've received what he's given you on the cross, you're justified, you're sanctified, and you're glorified. He's got you in that palm of his hand. No place to worry. And we know that God the Father loves us with the same love with which he loved his only begotten Son. John tells us that. Because we all sit here knowing, we look in the mirror and we go, oh, you're a jerk there, you blew that, you weren't honest there, and we beat ourselves up with all of those things. But he came to be the propitiation for all of that sin. He came to make the payment. He paid it in full. And you've been washed white as snow. All your sins, past, present, and future, are washed like they've never happened. His righteousness is now accounted into our account, accredited to us. Remember that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He already told us how to be right with him and what our judgment would be. He's already told us that. If you believe on me, you shall be saved. Job just catches a glimpse of that. What an amazing glimpse it is. If that lifted Job up in the depth of his misery. Shouldn't that lift us up? Shouldn't we be going, that's a great idea. I like that. Yeah, I've been struggling. I've been a little down. I've been a little whatever. But this is great stuff. And the resurrection, the second coming of Christ, is the major doctrine of the New Testament. 1 in 10 verses in the New Testament talk about his resurrection or his second coming. So verse 28 and 29, if you should say, how shall we persecute him, since the root of the matter is found in me? Be afraid of the sword for yourselves, for wrath brings the punishment of the sword, that you may know there is a judgment. Again, I like the King James Version of verse 28. It says this, but ye should say, why persecute we him, seeing the root of the matter is found in me? You guys know you're as guilty as I am. You guys know you came from the same dust bath. You get the same issues. The things I struggle with are the things you struggle with. He says you guys should know that. So in verse 29 it says we all need to be afraid of the sword for yourselves. For wrath brings the punishment of the sword, that you may know there is a judgment coming. When the Holy Spirit comes, he's going to teach the world about sin, about righteousness, and about judgment. There's right, there's wrong, and there's a judgment at the end. That's what we all need to figure out. Read ahead, guys. Great stuff. Lord, just want to thank you for your words. I want to thank you for putting this book in here, Lord. A lot of us struggle with it, a lot of tough ideas, and we're wondering if it's you or if it's Eliphaz or Bildad or Zophar or whoever it is. But Lord, let us just skim across and see your words and your truth. Lord, speak to us, build us up. Lord, send us out of this place and let us be your light. Lord, you've created us to be salt and light in this dark old world. Lord, let us shine for you.